Good morning, guys. It is Wednesday, May 8th, 2024. This is Bathrobe Business. I'm Georgi Oganov. I'm out of coffee, but I still have the news. So I did not have a video yesterday. The main reason was I was running a little bit late for work. Work has been a little bit hectic, but also I felt like I only had two major stories to report. I didn't feel like there was anything in the market that was worth reporting that had greater market implications, so I didn't do it. That's not a good habit. I don't like doing that. I like to give you guys a post every day, but I just felt like yesterday I was going to be phoning it in, and I didn't want to do that either, so I picked the lesser of two evils. I did, however, transplant two of those stories back into today's post, and I will start with them. So let's start with one big tech story, and it's a story out of it that was on CNBC yesterday from Andreessen Horowitz investors. So for those that know, Mark Andreessen, the famous Netscape navigator, has a big VC firm. And I think a comment that came out of there yesterday is really illustrating what's going on with the financial markets. The technology markets, big tech markets, and where it's headed as well. So, and I actually posted a link to this article in the link below, in the description below, so you guys can read it fully, because I think there's a lot of points in there that are actually pretty smart. So the quote from Andreessen Horowitz is that half of white-collar jobs half of Google's white-collar jobs are probably no real work, and this is greater market implication for tech in general. And previously, Mark Andreessen's group has talked about how so much of Silicon Valley is just fake work that you can eliminate, and it actually won't affect the company at all. Not to mention, it'll probably improve things because there's less bureaucracy, less hoops to jump through, not to mention less expenses. I think that to a large extent, that's true. This isn't necessarily just a problem of big tech. Any business that gets too big is going to have fake jobs. This is one of the primary arguments of activist investors, is that the companies have become big and bloated and need to do job cuts. Everybody from Carl Icahn to their names escape me now, but have made these arguments before. I just think that this finally come to the world of big tech. For the longest time, Silicon Valley was kind of untouchable in that regard. It didn't seem to operate under normal market standards, but now that interest rates are high, they have to. So I love that. I think it's just going to illustrate the fact that cuts to big tech are going to continue. I don't think this is going to be a moment in time. I think big tech is going to keep cutting and cutting because so much of it can be cut with no greater market implications. There's lots of VP positions, there's lots of marketing positions in these companies that have been kind of artificially created and are not necessary, especially in current environments where financing is much more expensive and these companies have major investments to do in engineering. So I think that that's why I think this story is very important, because I would bet on the fact that big tech layoffs are going to continue. Even most recently, we talked about this last week. Tesla laid off I believe 500 people. I think I reported on the number escapes me, but I believe I reported 500 people were cut from Tesla's supercharging teams, despite the fact that they just got major investment in that because so many other EV manufacturers are switching to their charging stations for charging. Like Ford, GM are going to be using their charging stations, so in other words, Tesla is gaining business, but they're cutting down on cost. And a lot of people will say, "Oh, Musk is crazy," blah blah blah. And I'm not a Musk stan by any means, but I think his maneuvers often don't deviate too far from what the larger tech environment is. He did major cuts at Twitter, but then Facebook did larger cuts, Google did larger cuts. So he really just does what everyone else does, sometimes just a little bit quicker than everybody else does. So I think that fact is going to continue. So that's why I think this story is important. Another big story was Stanley Druckenmiller. I have trouble saying his name. I want to say Druckenmiller, but Druckenmiller. He's a famous investor on Wall Street. He talked about the Biden economic policy, and this isn't so much about the politics of it, but what he said was that there are two things to blame for inflation. The first is the Federal Reserve, because they didn't cut interest rates quickly. Stopped raising interest rates and allowed it to continue. And then the fact that government spending has continued in the face of that. So I think he's right on both regards. The Fed stopped raising interest rates, which they should not have, and now inflation is back. and government spending has been ridiculous in the face of these higher interest rates. So the fact that we're paying interest on all this debt at a higher rate is also a major factor. So I think he's right in that on both regards, that the government is to blame with too much spending and the Fed is to blame with not enough hikes in interest rates. And they're still not talking about raising interest rates, despite the fact that they should be, because inflation is still very, very high. Next thing I'm going to talk about is mortgages. So this, I think, is illustrative of the fact of how much mortgages and how much the housing market is being backstopped right now by interest rates. Weekly mortgage refinance demand rose 5% after a slight dip in mortgage rates. So mortgage rates went down by 0.1%. So they went down. Give me 1 second. I'm going to give you guys the exact number. For some reason, I didn't record it at the beginning of the video. Don't tell me I lost my article. Yeah, so interest rates decreased to 7.18% from 7.29. So 0.1% decrease in the cost of mortgages, and refinances spiked 5%. So you can only imagine what would happen to the housing market if interest rates actually were cut by 0.25% or 0.5%, which isn't going to happen this year. I think we all know that at this point. It's something that I think was pretty evident last year when I was talking about it, but there were still people making the argument that the Fed is going to cut 3 times, 6 times this year. Yeah, right. But if they did, just 0.1 percentage point led to a 5% spike in refis. 0.25 percentage point would just be exponential. And so I don't think that the Fed should cut, and I don't think the Fed will cut anytime soon. One more note I want to make on mortgages. This is kind of a side note, but I think it's worth illustrating. There is a lot of chatter online, a lot of stupid chatter, about how home ownership is unnecessary and home ownership is stupid and how home ownership is a terrible investment. And this isn't the first time I've heard this argument, but it's now being said much louder than ever before. And I think this is a very dangerous sentiment, and I think it's very destructive and toxic. So just to give you some history, I remember when I first bought this house. So I'm going to be turning 37 this year. I bought this house at 25 years old for $175,000. And at the time, there was a lot of chatter online of, oh, home ownership is stupid. Home ownership is a bad investment. Millennials shouldn't buy homes. It's a terrible business decision. Look at what's happened to the housing market. Now realizing that, yeah, the housing market's been devastated. Now is the perfect time to buy. I don't see how anyone could draw any different influence. I'm not saying I'm a genius. I'm not saying I'm Warren Buffett, the Oracle of Omaha here, but it's pretty simple. Buy low, sell high. So I bought this house instantly, and now this house is worth over $500,000 just based off of county estimates. So when I go to sell this year, I'm going to have a very, very pretty profit. But in addition to that, just a couple years ago when COVID hit and housing markets spiked exponentially again, I took a home equity line out of this house and I purchased an investment property. So a home is one of the best investments you can make, but every day I go online and I see stupid articles and stupid posts from internet marketers and financial influencers. Just this morning, before I did this video, before I started doing research for today's video, a Graham Stephan's video came up with that girl from iCarly, Jeanette McMurdy or whatever her name is, and she was talking about, oh, I owned a home for a little while, and it was such a bad business decision. And I love renting, and renting is such a great idea, and I love being able to call someone and get something fixed. First of all, you can always call someone and get something fixed. They're called plumbers, they're called electrician, they're called handyman. I don't see how that's an argument. But my biggest problem here is Graham Stevens, I don't know exactly how you say his name, a man who made his fortune on real estate, has had multiple people on there advocating for the fact that real estate ownership is not necessary and is a bad idea. Now, I don't know if this is just trying to be, contrarian. I don't know if this is following certain online trends. I don't know if this is a government psyop, but I think this is absolutely ridiculous. Home ownership is one of the best investments anyone ever makes. Actually, to the point of investment, on Diary of a CEO, they had some idiot on there who was talking about how if you compare the S&P 500 to home ownership, you'll make more money on investing in the S&P than you will in home ownership. And that is a stupid strategy, again, because you're using opportunity costs to determine financial investment, which nobody does. Because, well, if you invested in Nvidia during that same time period, that beat out the S&P 500. If you invested in Bitcoin during that same period, it beat out the S&P 500. Actually, gold in, I think, from 2012 to 2020 would beat the S&P 500. So there's multiple investments that could beat the S&P 500, but people don't look at it that way because they're not actually actively doing real estate investing. What they're doing is making an investment in their future because they're locking in their rent, essentially. When you purchase a home in America, we have fixed interest rates. And purchasing a home is one of the best ways to lock in your rent for the next 30 years because right now, I pay less on this home than most people pay in rent in the state in Salt Lake Valley, in Utah. So essentially, by getting a mortgage, I locked in my rent for the next 30 years, whereas people out there will constantly see rent increases on a year-to-year basis. So purchasing a home, when people say is a great investment, it's because it's a smart financial decision. It's an allegory. It's not literal. They're not treating real estate as an asset class, which, by the way, most billionaires don't actually invest in the S&P 500. They actually have major stakes in real estate. Bill Gates is the largest farm owner in the United States. Chinese billionaires and Chinese millionaires invest in the United States real estate. Canadian millionaires invest in United States real estate. Real estate is one of the smartest decisions you can make. So don't listen to this chatter online of, oh, home ownership is outdated. Home ownership is unnecessary. No, if you can buy a home, you should buy a home. It's an incredibly smart decision no matter what. Don't listen to these online influencers that are trying to just be clickbaity and trying to get you to think about the market in a different way. Rich dad, poor dad. Bullshit. Buy a home if you can afford a home. That's all I'll say on that point. A bit of a rant, but I think it's a necessary thing to rant about. Last story I want to talk about is what the headline of the post is. It's about how big business is there to protect their money and not yours. So yesterday, the U.S. government has revoked export licenses to Huawei. I always get confused on how to say that name. To curb Chinese tech power. So essentially, the U.S. has been on a war with Huawei for a long time. But this latest war comes with their latest phone release that has been kicking Apple's ass for the last year or so, the Mate 30 or Mate 60. And this is actually a phone I saw on billboards all over the place when I was in Peru just a couple weeks ago. So I've reported multiple times of how Apple is getting their ass kicked, as they should, in China because their local manufacturers are creating phones that are much better, much easier to use, and don't come with all of the handcuffs that Apple usually comes with. Now the United States has decided to prevent that and protect U.S. national security by preventing Intel and Qualcomm to shipping chips to China. Now, why this is messed up? I'm a free trade guy. I'm a bit libertarian when it comes to this, and I think everybody should just be able to sell their products wherever they want. But even if that's an idealistic, naive way of thinking, this is so messed up because the U.S. is actually preventing domestic manufacturing in order to spur international manufacturing. Now, what I mean by that is Apple does not produce any of their products in the United States. Not even close. They probably don't even make their boxes in the United States. Everything at Apple is made at Foxconn, a little bit in India now. I know they love to tout that, but that's really just a PR stunt. Apple is made in China. Apple is not a United States company. They do not employ people here outside of the Genius Bar. Intel actually does manufacture chips in China. So when these jobs were leaving for China, the U.S. government did nothing. They did nothing to help save U.S. manufacturing. And right now, U.S. manufacturing is actually being stifled because a company that manufactures chips in the United States is not allowed to sell abroad so that a larger corporation, a billion-dollar organization, in fact, a trillion-dollar organization that makes their money with no domestic manufacturing can save their ass despite the fact that they make shitty products. So this is big government protecting big business, not protecting individual consumers here in the United States, not protecting workers in the United States, not protecting American workers. This is the epitome of globalization. This is the epitome of global economies. They're not looking out for the United States. If they had removed this ban, it would have helped U.S. manufacturing. No. They want to strangle U.S. manufacturing so that Apple can compete. so that Apple can raise its balance sheet so that big tech can have bigger numbers and bigger profits in the face of U.S. workers. It is absolutely ridiculous. It's disgusting. And on top of that, they're using a U.S. national security justification for production of cell phones. Are you effing kidding me? That's despicable. The Biden administration should be ashamed. And I know every single Republican from Nikki Haley to whatever that chick is that shot a dog is going to support this because all they can think about is, protect national security, despite the fact that we just hurt national security by hurting a domestic manufacturer. So that I'm very angry today, as you could see. That's already 2 posts I just think are absolutely ridiculous. But I think it just needs to be said because this is just destroying America's economy so that a company that quote unquote is American, even though they produce nothing within the United States, can raise their balance sheets because they can't compete against a better product. That's pretty much it. That's my post for today. I'll see you guys back here tomorrow. I hope you have a productive day.